Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to another Broken Meeple video, and finally I'm back for solo top 10s. Yes, I know you've been crying out for them for ages, and I'm sorry that they weren't being done before, but as you know from that live stream that I did where I talked about, viewer feedback, yeah, I got caught up doing other content and these got kind of laid to the wayside, but no more. These top 10s are coming back, and they're coming back with a bang. Starting with this one, top 10 essential expansions. Now, I've done a different format for these now. I'm going to do my 10, and then I'm going to go through a people's choice that I put on Facebook via polls, and I'm going to talk very briefly about what the people think compared to my own list. Now, that does not mean my list was influenced by what the people say. No. I came up with my list in advance of the people, but it's interesting to see where things kind of align, whether I'm a voice of the people or whether I'm a complete outsider. I'm sure most of you already have a theory about that. Now, the key word is essential. Well, what makes an expansion essential? It's okay saying, well, X game here was so good beforehand, and now with the expansion it's even better. Well, if it was so good before, was the expansion needed? Yes, okay, you might think, it's fantastic, it's a great expansion, and it makes it even better. That's well and good. But would you play the base game without it? Does the base game have a flaw in the mechanics that the expansion fixed? Are you actually of the like that you will not really play the base game ever unless you have this expansion in? Well, that's where I'm going with the whole essential thing. So these are 10 games, or 10 expansions to be more accurate, where I think that when you get the base game, you should consider strongly getting it at the go, at the offset, or very shortly after you've gotten used to the base game. And there's several reasons for why this is the case, but we'll get into the more detail with that. So without further ado, let's kick off, finally. For my number 10, yeah, I'm not joking, Catan. I am still of one of these people that likes Catan. I've not grown to this weird circle of people where it's like, now it's great to hate on Catan. No, Catan is still a fun game for me, but I'm going to admit, the base set is a little bit lacking. Firstly, there's not a huge amount of variety in there. Secondly, being on the outside of the island, unless you get very lucky with your harbour placement, is usually a little bit on the like, I'm in trouble here when I'm trying to win. And then thirdly, sheep, out of the 4 resources, is relatively underused, because aside from development cards, it doesn't really feature as much or as importantly as, say, building the cities and the towns. So sheep tend to get left by the wayside. Seafarers sorts out all 3 of those issues. It basically gives you a bunch of scenarios and setups where now you can go off to different islands. Not only is that more thematic, but it also means that sheep is more useful because you need the sheep to make the sails. It also means that if you're stuck on the outside of the island, you're just like, oh well, whatever, I'll go off to this other island. I can find gold as a wild resource, or I can just go to a different island and make up camp somewhere else. It gets you points, so it still furthers your objective to win the game, but it means that I don't have to stay on the original island. Okay, I could if I want, but if I'm on the outskirts, maybe I do want to go venture off and discover new lands. Maybe the numbers here don't suit me. Perhaps for whatever reason, clay is like such a rare resource now. I'll just go to this other island. Oh look, I found good source of clay. Well, I've got the monopoly, sucks to be you guys. Honestly, this is still a really good expansion for the game, and it's why it's still in my collection. Now, it gets even better when you add traders and barbarians. There's some elements in there like Fishernat and the Harbour Master, but even without those, you can ignore those for a bit. This is definitely one that I suggest getting with base set Catan. The rules for it are very straightforward, gives you even more scenarios. It doesn't really add that much to the complexity of Catan, which is already quite simple. Honestly, I still give this one a solid thumbs up. The game that I'm using for my number 9 has a little bit of a, not controversial, but a very disputed idea of what is considered an essential expansion for it. Some people might say cities is the essential expansion. Personally though, I say leaders for 7 Wonders. Doesn't matter if it's the 2nd edition or the 1st edition, they're entirely the same really. But basically what leaders does is that it not only gives more variety to the game in terms of starting sort of setups and plans, but it gives you a focus point for going through. When you play base set 7 Wonders, have you noticed that the first age is relatively meaningless? I mean, yeah, you've got to set yourself up in a way, and there's some ways that you can tailor it, but apart from that, you're kind of just going through the motions and seeing what turns up. But this gives you a path. It gives you an idea of like, okay, well, let's say I pick up these leaders. One gives me cheaper reds, one gives me points for reds. Okay, so maybe I should spend this game hunting down reds then. I might get a few just basic victory points. Oh well, as long as I've got the money to buy the leaders, I'll get points. Cool, just make sure you got some money then. This one allows me to get cheaper blues, cheaper greens. Oh, I've got some extra science symbols to begin the game with, an extra cog. Well, I better make certain I go after cogs then. And because the leaders only get hired at the start of each age, the opponents don't know what you've got planned. They might remember what was in the starting draft if they're particularly competent players, but for the most part, they won't necessarily know you've chosen that leader, and they won't know you for certain that you picked it for a particular age. It's a very easy implementation, although I do recommend maybe not picking it up instantly after you get 7 Wonders, mainly just because you've got to get used to the iconography first. But once you've got this, the iconography is relatively intuitive for someone who's used to 7 Wonders, and there's a massive guide booklet that tells you what they all do anyway. But just for that little bit of extra drafting at the start of the game, going, ooh, I'll take these leaders, or I'll take these leaders, of which there's a pretty good selection, this one just elevated 7 Wonders to a new level. Not to say that Cities isn't a good expansion, I did consider that one as well, but I can survive without Cities. But at the moment, because my friends want to play 7 Wonders on Board Game Arena as often as possible, I hate the fact that Board Game Arena doesn't have any expansions. Seriously, Asmodee, get on it, you slowpokes. Put expansions on Board Game Arena 7 Wonders now. Now! Right, ran over, but yeah, 7 Wonders, leaders, and, well, add to the cherry on top that with this edition you get Rome and Abu Simbel, or was it Abu Simbel, yeah, make sure I pronounce that right. 2 more Wonders, well, you can never have too much variety with 7 Wonders, so yeah, definitely worth grabbing this one as soon as possible after buying it. Now, I've technically not reviewed this game yet, and I don't know if I'll have time to do one, we'll see maybe in the future, but Xayah Legends of Adrift System came out with Embers of a Forsaken Star. Now, Mike Dainty from Not Board Gaming told me to grab this at the same time as I bought the base set when I was able to get it like cheaper on a sale. And I thought, am I sure I really want to go that heavy into this game investment-wise? So it's like, nope, you gotta get it, trust me, you'll adore it. And adore may be a strong word, but certainly I do think it's essential to grab it for several reasons. Firstly, the solo mode. Xayah has so much downtime in multiplayer, it is beyond horrendous. So really, the only way I want to play this game is 2-player or solo. The problem is, you can't play it solo unless you get this expansion, so you're kind of forced into it if you want to play Xayah for that purpose. It adds a lot more variety to the game in terms of sectors and like missions and like even more ways that you can kit out your ship, which is really cool. But another cool aspect, well, 2 more cool aspects. One, event deck. I like event decks when it comes to these like sandbox narrative story-driven games, but well, story-driven, it's your own story, but it's a sandbox game. You decide if you want to go hunt down the scoundrel, or take out the enforcer, or do missions, or explore, or go pick up and deliver cubes. Seriously? Who plays a Space 4X game to pick up and deliver cubes? How boring is that? You give me exploration and missions for me, or I'm the one going down and shooting down that scoundrel. It's like, you're mine, you are mine, I have you in my sights. You know, I'm always doing that in this game. But the event deck adds some cool stuff that happens that change up what's going on. It makes the galaxy come alive more, where weird stuff can happen. I mean, I've had everything from like, sort of like economy crashes to giant, like massive comets going across the entire landscape, taking out various sectors while it's at. It's like, wow, you can get some pretty crazy stuff happen, and that's great because it adds to the narrative and theme. And then finally, before moving on to the next pick, it also adds mods. The thing with Xayah Legends of Adrift in general is that there is definitely a lot of luck. A lot of luck, and that is good and bad. But a big one of that is things like shields and engines, where you could get a really good engine that's like a D12, but you're still rolling a D12, you could still just move 1 space. It's kind of naff when that happens.
Watch this.
Watch what?
Same can happen for shields. The mods, which are cheap to acquire, allow you to essentially up that minimum value. So you can get a mod that basically means that when you roll that D12 for your engine, your minimum value is 5 when you've got enough mods. So I mean, I can't remember the exact ruling, but that's essentially the gist. So the mods have a really good use because it basically helps to mitigate some of that luck factor. It's a pretty big expansion, and there's quite a lot in there, you know, for rules and that. Add there for a solo campaign, some relics, more more ships that you can do, more ship abilities, more a way to tailor how the economy works in this game. There's a lot in this expansion. You're certainly getting your money's worth, but I gotta admit, the game definitely feels weaker without it. And I highly recommend that when you're gonna get Zyre, if you're really gonna jump into this game, grab this at the same time. For number 7, I can't quite separate the expansion from the main game, but this is Terra Incognita for Civilization: A New Dawn. This was a big box expansion that Fantasy Flight put out, which adds a lot of new content to the game to make it a lot more grander and epic in scope, because it is essentially an abstracted version of the Sid Meier Civilization formula. What this does though is really changes up to the game, the point that I actually think this is definitely one that you need to get when you buy the game. For starters, you've got twice as many civilizations to work with now, each with their own specific focus card, which is always really good to have that variety. The focus track itself now has 6 slots on it rather than 5, which allows for some integral card play, and that's related to the new districts that you can build in your city, which takes a little bit of a leaf from Civilization 6, the PC game, where different districts in each city can boost it in various ways. Fairly simple rule to implement, and it's abstracted again from the PC game, but it's still really cool to have that variety of what you can do. But what it really does, 2 main things that are like, yeah, this is what you need in this expansion. Firstly, exploration. Finally, you actually can explore in this game. It's not like ridiculous levels of exploration, but previously the map was pre-built. Now you start off on an individual board and you can go explore different boards and they come up. So the world not only will appear more unique as each game goes on, but it now feels like I'm going out and discovering new locations. Like I say, it's an abstracted version of exploration, but it is at least actual exploration. I mean, finally. But another big factor is that it gives you revised rules for caravans and military units. In order to fit with the new mechanics, these rules have had to be revised, they've had to be a little bit more streamlined, although there's still a reasonable amount in this game. This is certainly still not a midweight game. But with those rules in place, it improves how caravans and military units work. But the problem is, it's quite a big change from the original rules. So if you only play the base game for a while, you have to unlearn how those worked before, and then learn the new rules for the units and caravans. So you might as well from the get-go get the better version and learn those rules from scratch. The only annoyance is that Fantasy Flight did not put out a single rulebook for this game so that they could condense the whole lot together. That was a guff. Seriously, Fantasy Flight, did you not think that might be a useful thing?
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
But add to that the governments that allow you to get a little bit of a bonus depending on what like technology you're going for. This expansion adds a lot to a game that was really, really good. It was in my top 100, but it was kind of like, I feel like it's missing something. It needs that little bit of an extra push. Well, this is the push it needs. This is definitely a must-buy if you enjoy A New Dawn, and if you haven't got it yet, seriously consider doing so. In order to store the complete game for this one, I've had to keep the box for this expansion and actually put stuff in it, and that is Norwegians for Feast of Odin. Okay, we're not doing that joke again. We're done with that. It was funny the last time. We don't need to do it again. Stop it. Don't make me come over there. Seriously, I will. Okay, I just need to have a quick word with future me. Right, Norwegians, Feast of Odin. This is definitely a must-buy expansion for this game, because as much as the base game was still good fun, I'm sorry, but you can castrate me all you like, but it wasn't particularly balanced, was it? What? Seriously, was it really that balanced? There were certain actions that were not worth taking on that board, like you rarely went to certain marketplace spaces, and did anybody ever win the original game by using animals? Seriously? I mean, if you did, I don't know what the rest of your other players were doing, because they really are not efficient. Most people went for some weird form of exploration, or for the most part, they tried to emigrate. That was a big thing that they used to do. Seriously, the base game was still good fun, but it always capped on my top 100 because I knew that there were balance issues with it. This does a very good job of fixing a lot of that though. Firstly, you've now got modular boards for different player counts, but the boards now have a 5th column on there, and with this 5th column you're essentially able to like take a really good action, one that's really powerful, gets you a lot of stuff, but it's got to be the last action you do on the turn. So they're first come, first serve, and you really want that action, but you know it's the last one you get to put meeples down on. So do you go for it early so that you can do stuff like now, risking the fact that somebody else might get it? Or do you wait till later? Do it at the very end, and then it's like, oh, please don't take that space, please don't take that space, please don't take. Oh, phew, we're good. It's a really nice, interesting decision to make, and a way to get a serious boost in resources if you can get the timing right. But it completely revamps the actions and does tweaks to the various actions that balance things out nicely, at least for a better. I don't know if it's still 100% balanced, but it certainly does a better job than the base game. Immigration's been taken down a bit, exploration's been a little bit tweaked, but most of all, animals have been completely changed. You could now get, as well as like pigs and sheep, I think it was before, now you can get like cows and horses. Was it actually, couldn't you get pigs before? I can't remember. Like I say, you can now get more animals this time round. You can breed more. There's like ones that are not worth as many points, but you can breed a lot of them, and vice versa. But it makes animals now interesting, and I have actually won a game with animals with this expansion. So it's like, you know, it's fun. I come from a Caverna background and Fields of Isle where you can breed animals. I find that fun in games. Well, now I can do it in Feast of Odin and actually stand a half decent job of winning the game, depending on what I do, of course. Add to that the amount of variety that this adds with the extra like sheds and tiles and things, like different tiles of all shapes and sizes that you can put down. It's quite a big compendium of stuff. I mean, you're going to have a lot of these tokens all over your board. It will be a table hog and a half when you've got this out. But on top of that, you've even got starting setups. You can start with your own very personal like shed that you can build during a game that's a unique layout for you. So some player differentiation as well. I love that kind of thing. So this is a really cool expansion. It took me a long time before I could get hold of this because it was impossible to get it Essen at the time. And eventually, Z-Man, we had to pull their finger out from somewhere in order to get them to hurry up and reprint this thing. But eventually I got it, and yeah, I will never ever teach Feast of Odin without it. Yes, it means you're going to have to learn quite a lot from the offset, but trust me, it's worth it. Now, before I get on to my top 5, if you've been enjoying this video, please consider leaving a like and hitting that thumb. It takes a millisecond and I would greatly appreciate it. On top of that, don't forget that this channel is sponsored by Zatu.co.uk. There's a code in the description for 5% discount on your entire basket of games. Maybe you found something on this list that takes your fancy. Consider going to Zatu, finding out if it's in stock, and if so, save yourself some pennies while acquiring yourself a great game. Now, on to the top 5. My number 5 featured on one of my Beyond the Base Game videos. Yeah, come on, if I'm doing Beyond the Base Game, you think that one of them at least is going to feature on this top 10. Well, Role Player Monsters and Minions certainly did. Role Player is already a fun game. I found it to be better than Sagrada in its base set form, although it was longer and I still felt, maybe there's just something missing out of this. Role Player Monsters and Minions, though, however, fixed that. Not only do you have more variety as before, but you now have this whole different concept of, as well as getting the items and building up your character, you can go out and hunt minions. And in order to hunt those minions, you need like special bonuses to do so, and you get more bonuses depending on the minion itself. But when you kill them, you get experience, which you can trade in to do various different things. On top of that, if you get the trophies, you're able to find out characteristics of the main final boss, the big monster, the devil, the Gorgon, the Kraken, whatever. And when you find out these aspects of the monster, you can discover, oh, I know, and I can get bonuses to fight him later if I gear myself up for this. Well, that's pretty cool. I should start thinking about doing that. And then once the game ends normally, you then have to fight that big monster. And depending on what you've found out about it will give you more bonus combat dice, and you fight it and you can get more points that way. It adds this really cool thematic element to a game which is essentially about character creation, but it completes that whole D&D flavor of, right, here's me character, here's me stats, here's my items, where's the monsters? Oh, there they are. It's cool, it's got a lot of different minions to fight, a lot of different monster bosses to go up against, and you don't have to care about it. If you've spent all your game just focusing on stuff like really good items and traits, good, then don't care what you get on the monster. But you could make the monster your focus. Like, I am actively going out and killing a ton of these minions so that I can, get those points for at the end of the game for the monster and blat it, like chop its head off or whatever. It's a really solid expansion, not complicated at all. It is a must teach, I think, with the base game. it brought role player to a level where I was now certain it beat out Sagrada. Like, I will not play Sagrada anymore. I will easily pull out this with Monsters and Minions. I will teach it with Monsters and Minions every single time. Now, yes, granted, the monster stuff appears in Fiends and Familiars as well, but the Familiars and the Fiends add a little bit more complexity to the game that's not as like desperately needed, and obviously this one is a much easier include than Fiends and Familiars, so I would definitely say get this one first. But I'm not the only one who believes this. This is definitely a must buy for role player. For number 4, we now have one of my favourite games at the moment, or certainly one that I've been playing to death lately, whether it's on Steam, on TTS, Tabletop Simulator, or in its board game form thanks to my pimped out Cappy. Oh yes, Spirit Island has an essential expansion, and it's Branch and Claw. Now some of the people are probably going, hang on, what about Jagged Earth? What about Jagged Earth?
Subtle.
Jagged Earth is good. It's a fantastic expansion, and by the time this video comes out, you will have already seen my Beyond the Base Game video for that. But Jagged Earth is a smorgasbord of content. I mean, it adds a ton on top of the base game if you haven't got this, and it certainly ups the complexity of the spirits in the game itself. So as great as it is, I don't think it's a must-buy from the get-go, because you've already got to get used to Spirit Island, which is already a complex game. But the reason I class this one as essential is because A, it's not a particularly expensive one to get. It's a fairly small box, but in this you get 2 more spirits, you get a bunch more powers, you get those 4 different tokens, the disease, strife, the beasts, and what am I missing here? And the wild tokens. Yes, I don't use them very often, so I keep forgetting about them. But it adds a lot of cool variety already, but then you've also got the event deck, which granted not every Spirit Island player loves, but the majority do, which adds that cool variable story element to the game, where each round an event happens, different things can go off, and depending on what tokens and what your setup's like, and it could be good, it could be bad, but it just adds that extra unknown factor so that you can't just predict the game from start to finish like a massive procedural puzzle. That granted, some Spirit Island players love that, and fair play to you, kudos. It's just for me, I personally think the event deck is a must use. Now, why I say this rather than just jumping straight to Jagged Earth is because this is a good stepping stone. Just 2 more spirits that utilize the tokens. 4 out of the 5 tokens you get in this one, whereas you get 5 of them in, like 5 types in Jagged Earth. So Badlands, whatever, I can wait till I get those, but you want the 4 tokens in here. It gives you a smallish event deck, but again, it sort of leads you into this stuff. And I feel that when you're getting used to Spirit Island and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, how do I play this game? All right, how do I get used to it, get used to the tactics and that? This is a much easier kind of inclusion to guide you to the upper echelons of what Spirit Island has potential. Whereas if you go straight to Jagged Earth, I feel that you are literally like jumping across a chasm in order to try and get from what you started with to what it is now. I certainly recommend grabbing this one first, and honestly, I bought this at the same time I bought the base set. I bought it in a bundle, and I pretty much threw it in straight away. As I say, it's when you've already got to learn Spirit Island, it's easy enough to incorporate this as well, and the tokens themselves aren't that complicated. Beast tokens, the disease and that, they've got pretty simplistic rules. The 2 spirits that you get are really cool. One of them is one of my favourites, Sharp Fangs, and they're both moderate difficulty, whereas if you go straight to Jagged Earth, a lot of those spirits, even though they say moderate, I would say are pretty complex or pretty weird and game-changing, whereas there's stuff in there that's like very high complexity, as if the game, like I said, wasn't already complex before. For the price point, I think this is definitely a must-get very shortly, if not immediately, when you get Spirit Island. Branch and Claw for my number 4. And while we're on the subject of Beyond the Base games, the first one I ever did was for this one, Abyss Leviathan. Yes, it doesn't really tell you that on the cover, you kind of had to tilt it sideways to find out. But yeah, this is a must buy. We're getting on to the expansions now where I feel that you really have to buy it from the get-go. I mean, I know I said that a couple of times before, but I could understand if for complexity's sake or money investment you don't want to. But honestly, no, we're now at the stage where you need to get these at the start, and this is no exception. Kraken is a really good expansion, but you can leave that one till second. Here though, it does, not only does it add a cool mechanic where you're actually fighting the big giant Leviathan creatures with this like ridiculously gorgeous artwork on there, but it fixes the only problem I have with the base game of Abyss. I love Abyss. Abyss is a fantastic game, but that monster track was a bit of a downer because it wasn't particularly thematic. It only came up a few times, and basically if you fought the monster you got a little bonus immediately, like no risk or reward or anything like that. It was just like go, and if you avoided it you leveled it up a track, and the bonus got slightly better as you went on. The problem is there's only so many times the monster ever came out, and nobody ever let the bonus get above the halfway point. So what was the point in having the half of that track? People mainly just took the bonuses straight away, and it just felt like a very tacked on element to Abyss. Well, this replaces the monster track. So the cool thing with battling the Leviathans and getting different bonus tokens, whether it's points or the extra pearls and stacks that you can do, the Leviathan track allows you to do that, but now it just feels more thematic. You've got the gorgeous cards, and if you kill more Leviathans than other people, you can get a 5-point bonus at the end of the game, so it's another path to victory. But just for the fact that for the cheap price point, because this is not expensive, it replaces the 1 weak element of Abyss. And there's not even that much complexity here. You are basically replacing one set of rules with another set of rules that aren't particularly complex. So it's not like with Kraken where you're adding on very specific new rules that aren't that complex, I admit, but still it's adding on a new set of rules to learn. Here you're simply replacing like for like. So you could just import this into the game, teach it with this, and frankly anybody who's new to Abyss will not even realize that you've thrown this in as an expansion. They'll just think it's part of the base game. It is that seamless. Honestly, you must get this immediately upon buying Abyss. It is that essential. Now for my number 2, I am not getting my giant collector set from the other room. I do not need to be holding that on the camera while I'm trying to explain it. But this is, whether it's the Essentials version or the normal version, it doesn't matter. It depends on what stage you bought Viticulture at. Yes, of course, I'm talking about Tuscany. Tuscany, whether it's the Essentials or not, it doesn't matter. Whichever version you've got, you need to get the Tuscany add-on to it. It basically adds modules to the game that propel Viticulture from what was essentially kind of like in my 50s and 60s in my top 100 before. Like, I thought it was really good. I mean, it was in my top 100, come on, give it some credit. But it didn't ever hit my top 10 until Tuscany was included, because it includes some key things to make the game that much better. Now, Essentials has borrowed some stuff from there already, but not a lot. Seriously, I don't know what Stonemaier was thinking with how they packaged the Essentials line, but oh well, I digress. You've got the Mamas and Papas. It's a normal Viticulture Essentials, but it was originally in Tuscany, and who doesn't use Mamas and Papas? It's starting setups and differentiation. Of course you're going to use it. But what Tuscany Essentials and Tuscany essentially add is, firstly, structures. I love these structures. The orange cards that allow you to grab 2 extra spots for your board. That could be extra worker spots that you can go to, or different bonuses, or even things that unlock different paths to victory. I remember playing a game where I built a cafe and a restaurant, and all it wanted me to do was get cheap grapes and cheap wine and pump it with points. Great, fine. Screw you lot making wine orders, I'm just going to make the cheapest wine and run a cafe business for the rest of the game. And I actually won, but it felt like in the spirit of Viticulture, because I was still doing wine and grape stuff, but it was a completely different path to victory to what the other players were doing, and the orange structures allow for this. On top of that, you've also got the special workers that you can use, where you can have a different worker in the game that has a special ability when it's used. I can take or leave it depending on how new players are to Viticulture, but if you're competent in the game, it's a pretty sweet include to use. You've got advanced visitor cards to add on to what you had before, or even replace what you had before, because people do complain about those visitor cards a lot, but you know, as much as there is some luck in this game, the advanced cards you get in Tuscany do a much better job of balancing out that mitigation, because they're usually multi-choice. If one choice doesn't work out for you, chances are the other choice should work out for you. But here's the big thing, the board, the new board. You need that board. The basic board is fine, but it's lacking. It's only got 3 seasons on it. The wake up chart is fairly basic, and that's pretty much all it has. You need the revised board, which has 4 seasons with actions spread out in each season that are more clearly defined as to what they're good for. Like, for example, building and vines is great in the spring, planting them and doing trading is great in the summer, grapes and crushing and that is all good in the autumn, and then wine orders and making wine is good in the winter and stuff. So it clearly spreads them out. You've got a much more advanced wake-up chart with lots of different bonuses and things that you can do. I mean, going first or second is considerably different from going, say, 6th or 7th in the lineup. You've got a little mini-map on top, which adds a kind of little mini area control game that you have where you put influence stars on places, it gets bonuses, but also gives you VP at the end of the game. Another path to victory per se. It comes together in a much better setup for viticulture. This is not something that I didn't even have to do a people's choice to know that this was something that was a shared response. Viticulture is good when it doesn't have Tuscany in it, but it never hits top 10 potential worker placement games of all time until you throw in all the stuff with Tuscany. Now, when I say all, I'm pretty much talking about all in case of Essentials Tuscany. If, like me, you've got the original Tuscany, you can go tell the Mafia and the olive oil board and the cheese board or whatever to get in the sea, because you really don't want to use that stuff. It takes it to a stupid level of complexity that you don't need. But the structures, the advanced visitors, and that board are a must buy. Now you may be thinking, oh well, you're just going to put your favourite games on here, Luke, so you're probably a little bit biased in that respect. Nope. This game I think is overrated as all get out. I refuse to play it above 3 players. I've only just recently warmed up to it enough that I'd actually want to play it full stop, but I will admit wholeheartedly that, and honestly, that Prelude is about as quintessential an expansion as you can possibly get for a game. I will outright refuse to play Terraforming Mars if you don't put Prelude in your game. And preferably, I'd rather you only put Prelude in your game and not Venus or Colonies or that god-awful Turmoil one, whatever it was. Seriously, who thought that was a good idea?
But your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Hey, let's add even more complexity to this heavy game. Oh, by the way, the game takes another half hour at least each. No! No. Prelude is a very simple and very cheap expansion, but it's an auto-include. It adds actual player differentiation. And you might be thinking, well, hang on, what about the corps? Well, the corps don't add a great deal of differentiation. It gives you a little bit of extra different money setup and maybe a little bit of extra bonus here and there, but you might take the corp that really wants you to build plants and never see a green card in the entire game. Whoopee, that corp went to waste then. What Prelude does though is you now deal out 4 cards to each player that give you some particular bonus for whatever. It might give you a bunch of titanium production. It might give you some extra tags. It might give you some like extra incentive or discount when you buy green plant cards. It's got lots of different variety in there, but you pick 2 of them and you have them at the start of the game. This not only differentiates players significantly from each other, on top of the fact you've got extra corps in there, which is nothing, which is always a good thing, but it also, because it gives you that bonus from the offset, shortens the game. Terraforming Mars is too long a game. It really should have been 90 minutes max for a game like that, probably even less for what is essentially a drafting game with a map on it. But with this game taking 2.5 to 3 hours on a regular basis, sometimes longer with more players, seriously, you need to shorten it as much as you can. And most people are averse to using that +1 production across the range thing, whereas I always wanted to use that variant because it sped up the game. Well, now you don't have to use that variant if you don't want to, as long as you have Prelude, because it essentially achieves the same thing without just having a blanket +1 across the range. It easily chops off a good 15 minutes at least off the game. It basically saves you at least maybe 1 or 2 generations, possibly even 3 generations, depending on what your starting lineup is and what cards appear. But for the price point, you need this expansion. I can't imagine anybody who has Terraforming Mars and doesn't want to include Prelude in there. You may not have bought it yet. Maybe you've got Terraforming Mars recently and you just haven't got round to buying it or went out of stock. But I don't know anybody who decides to not include Prelude. It's just such an auto-include, it's practically ridiculous to comprehend. I can't even comprehend somebody who wouldn't put Prelude in their game, regardless of whether they shove the other expansions in, or to be honest, considering colonies and that add to the length of the game, you would probably want to have Prelude in there to at least balance it out. It's that essential. I will not play Terraforming Mars if you don't have Prelude in there. The Steam app only recently got Prelude on there, and it's annoying, you have to pay an extra $5 for it, but oh well. But still, it's like, now it's got it, finally we can have Prelude on the Steam version. So we've been waiting for it for so long. This is something that really should have just been in the base game to begin with. Now on to the people's choice. I go on Facebook and I put up a poll for the people, essentially the people on the board game group, in order to say what they think about this topic. You know, what are their essential expansions? And I'm going to do this for all future solo top 10 lists, because it's good to get an extra perspective on what things are out there. And I'm only talking about 10 games essentially. Well, now there's potentially another 10 games here, although there will be some overlap, where you can find out about other titles that maybe I didn't consider. And this is the chance to tell you more. So number 10 for the people was Zyre Embers of the Forsaken Star. Yeah, they agree. If you're a Zyre fan, you need to get this in order to get that solo mode and all the extra variety content it has. Number 9 was Spirit Island, Branch and Claw. Yep, again, the Jagged Earth was voted on, but it didn't get as many votes as Branch and Claw. And as I say, I know Jagged Earth's a fantastic expansion, but just that massive jump in complexity and content is maybe just a bit too much for the starting Spirit Island player. I still recommend Branch and Claw, as I mentioned before. Number 8, this is the one I don't get on here. Out of all of these, I'm like, what? Wingspan European expansion.
Right.
I don't get that at all. All the European expansion does is adds more birds. You get an extra power, which is the end of round stuff, which is cool, and you get some more gold tiles. Other than that, that's all it does. It basically just adds more variety to the game. But were you really playing Wingspan and going, oh, well, I've seen everything, I'm bored now, or Wingspan doesn't have anywhere near enough variety, or this game sucks, but now with European birds, it's suddenly better. It's like, no. I mean, it's great and it's an auto-include when you're teaching the game, but that just makes it a good expansion. I wouldn't say this makes it an essential one. You can get Wingspan without the European birds and happily enjoy Wingspan before you decide to up the content. Let's see, that was 10, 9, 8. Number 7, now you'll probably be like, Luke, why wasn't this on your list? You should be ashamed of yourself it wasn't on your list. Champions of Midgard Valhalla. There's a good reason for that, people. I haven't played it yet. You know, I'm trying to. I played Champions of Midgard and I was kind of like, oh man, there's a bit too much luck in this game. I spent all this time gearing up for this voyage and then I rolled badly and now I've lost. That's not particularly great. But I know that Valhalla is meant to solve that problem. It's meant to fix that issue with the base game, and I'm willing to believe that's the case. I just haven't had a chance to find out for myself. I know someone at my Southampton group who has the game with the expansions, but every time he brings it, I've always got something else to do. I must try and get this played. I guarantee you, the first opportunity I get to play Champions of Midgard with Valhalla, I will. But clearly, the people know it's already good, which is why it was on this list. So even though I didn't mention it, honourable mention on the people's choice. Number 6, this was on my shortlist, but I didn't think it was a top 10 worthy one. Star Wars Rebellion Rise of the Empire. It's a good expansion for Star Wars Rebellion. It adds more Rogue One stuff, so you just basically got more variety, more ships, more characters and that, which is cool. But the main reason people call it essential is because it revamps the combat system. The combat system in the base game is still good, but there's some disconnect with the theme and it's a little bit clunky in places. The new version is a little bit more streamlined, but what it essentially gives you is a cinematic style of combat. The cards that you can play at the start of the round kind of make sense. It makes combat a little bit more fluid, but just much more thematic and entertaining. Certainly after playing both versions, I would easily teach this game with that element from Rise of the Empire in it, although you are definitely leading up to a big investment in rule set to have this taught to a new player from the get-go. That's why I didn't feel like I wanted to put it in my top 10, but I still admit it is definitely an expansion worth considering for Star Wars Rebellion. Number 5, I also considered Ticket to Ride USA 1910 or Europe 1912, pick one. I don't think this is that essential from the get-go though. I mean, you can play Ticket to Ride a fair few times before you start noticing the same tickets come up. Then you can start to add the extra tickets in. The 10th anniversary or the 15th anniversary for Europe version will already have that built in, so you're already getting that. But yeah, honestly, it's just basically more tickets. And yes, you are going to need more tickets if you're playing USA and Europe a lot. But considering how many maps there are for Ticket to Ride now, if you're starting to play USA and Europe too much, you could always just grab another map pack. And chances are I'd rather do that because honestly, USA and Europe are fairly low down on my Ticket to Ride maps list. I did the top 10 for this last year, and I don't think USA featured on my top 10. I was more interested in the map packs. So if you feel like you're seeing all the tickets in USA and Europe, just grab a map pack. But like I say, it's still a good expansion, it's cheap, and it's an auto-include when teaching the game, so I can understand it's popular with the people. Number 4, they agree with me with roleplayer, monsters, and minions. Yes, definitely more essential, I would say, than fiends and familiars. Number 3 is one that I didn't mention. I considered it Lords of Waterdeep, Scoundrels, or Skullport. Honestly, as great as the expansion is, I mean, the corruption mechanic with taking these big actions, but they get you these skull tokens that vary in how many negative points they're worth, and expanding the board with more worker placement spots and that, it's a great expansion. But Lords of Waterdeep was still fun in its base set form, and one thing about essential expansions, it's a case of, are you willing to play the base game without it? And with something like, say, for example, Architects of the West Kingdom, Artisans, I think that's a fantastic 10 out of 10 expansion. But I will happily play Architects of the West Kingdom without it. It's not like the game was busted beforehand, and Lords of Waterdeep is no exception. Lords of Waterdeep was still a good fun game without Scoundrels or Skullport. Granted, I love Scoundrels of Skullport and it's in my copy and I would love to play it as often as possible. But if I go to a convention and somebody's new and it's like, oh, I don't want the expansion just yet, just teach me the base game, I'll teach them the base game and I'll still have a good time. And I have to admit, I was kind of surprised it got to number 3 on here. I mean, there's a quite close votes for the ones before this, but then it jumps up a bit for roleplayer and then it jumps significantly each time for these top 3. Top 2, Viticulture, Tuscany for number 2. Yes, a lot of people agree with me on that. I mean, if you're a Viticulture fan, you need Tuscany. And if you don't have Tuscany in your game and you're a fan of Viticulture, I would sure love to know in the comments why not. And number 1 by a considerable margin, not quite twice the votes, but certainly a good 50% more votes at least, Terraforming Mars Prelude. Yes, everybody. I mean, there are far more people that like Terraforming Mars than dislike it. I know I'm in the minority when I say it's overrated, but yeah, whether you like the game or not, Prelude is essential. It really should be packaged with the base game now. It is that essential, and the people agree wholeheartedly. So that's it for me on this video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, please consider leaving a like. If you're interested in expansions in general though, I have done more content via my Beyond the Base Game series. There's several videos in that category. Maybe you'd like to start from the beginning with Abyss, Leviathan, which I've talked about on this list, but also I mentioned Branch and Claw for Spirit Island, so perhaps you'd like to check out that video afterwards. But there's a whole series, there's a playlist for it, and by all means, check it out at your leisure. Thanks for joining me on this video. Remember, it's only a game, and I'll see you on the next Top 10 list. Bye for now.